I am Father Dick Mahalik. I'm walking around Enders Island to help integrate scenes of the island today with scenes in the illuminations as we head to the chapel to begin our exploration of the illuminations of the Way of the Cross done by Judd Gibbons. We welcome you to a third segment of the Way of the Cross, looking at the illuminated Stations of the Cross at Our Lady of the Assumption Chapel at St. Edmund's Retreat on Enders Island in Mystic, Connecticut. We've covered 5 stations of the cross, and we're at the 6th station, and this one is Veronica wipes Jesus' face. I'm not sure how you think of this particular station. Most of my life, I have thought of Veronica as being someone who was close to Jesus and watched for him, was eager to step forward and to wipe his face. The illumination, however, doesn't reflect that. It reflects the fact that there is wind. It's near the grapevines here on the island, and the wind is quite severe on that side of the island. And as a result of the wind, Veronica is not aware of Jesus until you'll notice in the illumination, Jesus has stepped into her bowl of grapes. And it is that intrusion that gets her to react and recognize his presence. And then she responds with her compassion and her gesture of wiping his face. And she then is able to have that image kept as part of her spiritual experience. The illumination includes in the borders, because the illumination is very small and yet very detailed, you can easily miss some of the things that are in it. In the top corner there is a sand dollar, and the sand dollar has 5 little ovals. Those 5 ovals obviously are symbolic of the 5 wounds of Jesus. You can look at one of the grape leaves, and if you look carefully, you'll see the image of Jesus crucified. One of the drops of blood has another image. So as you ponder the illumination, it invites you to think about how many times do you miss so much of the presence of God and Jesus in our lives, and in what ways might we be more spiritually alive if we simply paid attention and listened for his voice, used our eyes to see through faith his presence. The 7th station in the Way of the Cross is Jesus falls the 2nd time. And again, a reminder, the illuminations are using the 3 falls to tie with the 3 temptations in the desert of Jesus. This one is the temptation where Jesus says, a man does not live by bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. So we're considering here what we value, what defines us. Really, we're talking about possessions. The first temptation is to be concerned with popularity. The second one is the P for possessions. And the site of the station is the exterior entrance that goes down into the basement of the main house. We can easily become absorbed with money, possessions. We can easily define ourselves. You'll notice that this is also, besides the door that goes down into the basement, we're right next to the kitchen and dining room of the main house. and the idea of what nourishes us, what feeds us. You know, you notice that the border is filled with things to eat, things that feed us. So often as one of the rappers talks about, it's all about the Benjamins, you know, the $100 bill. One of the rappers sings about the more money, the more problems we have. And it can easily be that pit of going down rather than, and so this second temptation is that whole obsession with our possessions. And we sometimes define ourselves, you know, with what we have and what we don't have. And the idea is we look at somebody and, oh, he's got this, he's got that. And so we think very highly of somebody with a lot of things and very poorly of someone who has next to nothing. And so the temptation is this obsession with possession. St. Edmund, the patron of the society, talks about don't be possessed by your possessions. This brings us to the 8th station, and the 8th station is the women of Jerusalem meet Jesus on his way to Calvary. The illumination is fascinating in a number of ways. It depicts the gazebo here on the island, and it may surprise some people to learn that women were actually paid to mourn someone who was being crucified. And the women were in the gazebo, so to speak, with their children, tending their care. And Jesus, for whatever reason, they're paid to wail, and yet his attractiveness brings them out of the safety of the gazebo. So that's part of what's depicted. The other thing we find is a red blanket around the children, the infants, and one of the infants is crawling towards a memorial marker, and there are a number of memorial markers around. We have squirrels that are literally consuming even the frame around the illumination, and we have a couple mourning birds. And the purpose, I believe, that Jed Gibbons had in mind as he was pulling these different elements together was to engage us into thinking about our children and what is happening to them. And of course, Jesus' words, don't mourn for me, mourn for your children. What are some of the things that are going on with our children that concern us even today? And of course, we've gone through in recent years the sexual abuse scandal. One out of four girls will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. 1 out of 6 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. 1 out of 10 will drop out of school. 1 out of 4 live in poverty. That's just a few things. We also, when we see the squirrels eating and consuming and literally devouring all of the scene, we think about the environmental impact to our planets. What are we leaving our children? The red blanket obviously is meant, as it wraps the infant, to talk about the suffering. And in addition to the suffering that children endure in this life, we think about how children are often seen as a burden rather than, in Jesus' time, they were seen as a great blessing. How do we see the children of our world? What legacy will we leave them? The 9th station is the 3rd fall of Jesus. And if you recall the first fall, we talked about how the illuminations tried to parallel the temptations of Jesus in the desert. The first one, Jesus is climbing the stairs as he falls, and that was tied with the preoccupation of popularity, our self-preoccupation. The second fall was pictured outside the kitchen and dining room, and loaves of bread, and it was meant to tie with the temptation of we don't live on bread alone, or dough or possessions. The third fall has to do with the third P, and the third P concerns us all a great deal. It's power, control. Who has power? Who has control in life? And you notice in the illumination, Jesus is looking into what is a large bird bath here on the island, and it's filled with water, and the water is reflecting up into the heavens, and Jesus is being tempted to think in terms of the power that he might have over all creation. We have goldfinches as birds that are nesting into thorny plants. And the thorny plants have been used in other illuminations as part of the crown of thorns, which if you're a king and you're wearing a crown, it's a symbol of power. So again, we're dealing here with the temptation to be concerned with being in control, having power. And it is a temptation that faces all of us, and it is certainly something within our nation at the present time, as we have political parties at odds with one another, and an inability to communicate, an unwillingness to really be open to truth and to really preserve harmony over conflict. Before we move to the 10th station, it's rather apropos to have between Jesus' third fall, dealing with power, and the 10th station, Jesus being stripped of his garments, to have a statue of Matt Talbot. Matt Talbot certainly became powerless over alcohol by age 13. And he has become a patron for those who are trying to recover from alcoholism, or an ongoing sobriety based upon 12 spiritual steps. But Matt also ties with the idea of Jesus being stripped of his garments, because here is an individual, when he was consumed with his addiction to alcohol, literally stripped himself of his clothes and his boots in order to sell them to get money for his addiction. And what saved him, and why the church looks upon him as venerable at this stage, is the fact that he turned his life around with a spiritual awakening. He went from being an indifferent Catholic, someone who just was, okay, I'm Catholic and there isn't much there, to someone who became very devout. And his devotedness played itself out in going to things like daily mass, learning to pray, forms of asceticism where he would fast, where he would read the spiritual masters, people like St. Francis de Sales. And as he would come to things he didn't fully understand, he'd bring them to his confessor, and he would grow in his faith. The interesting facet of his life is he not only went to Sunday daily mass, but he went to multiple masses on Sunday, and he dies on the feast of the Holy Trinity on his way to mass. The other interesting thing is the church commemorates him on June the 19th. June the 19th. June the 19th is significant for a number of reasons, civil rights, African Americans, but it's also the anniversary of the death of the founder of the Edmondites. The 10th station is Jesus is stripped of his garments, and the scene is one that takes place in what we refer to as the Garden of the Two Hearts here at Ender's Island, and it's kind of a valley effect and kind of an upward thrust as you look into this nicely arranged garden that has two statues, one of the Sacred Heart, one of the Immaculate Heart. And Jesus has positioned himself after he has been stripped of his red outer garment that serves as kind of a red carpet going up the steps. The guys that are his executioners are throwing dice, trying to figure out who's going to get that beautiful piece of cloth that they don't want to tear it. We also see, besides the dice, if you are paying attention to all 15 of the stations, you realize that we begin with spring. We move to summer, and now we have moved into the autumn of life. And the last stations will be winter. But here we've got the leaves falling, and the leaves serve as part of the border. And the whole idea is to get us to think about Jesus is finding shelter in this cove from the wind, the storms, the winds that are going on and around him. The men are preoccupied with what they're going to get out of this. But Jesus is simply calmly waiting in this quiet little cove. And he is literally been stripped of everything at this point, and he is, for the most part, almost naked. And it raises, as we look at this particular illumination, some would realize, hey, when I die, I'm going to stand naked before God, exposed for all that I've done or failed to do in my life. What will folks see? What will God see when I am judged at the moment of my death?